The story begins with Camille, who is at the doctor's, giving him all the information about herself. The doctor questions her about her work and company, and she informs him that she works in a cleaning company named Clean. He seems curious to know more about her work, so she adds that her company provides all sorts of cleaning services. He thinks that she is joking, but Camille assures him that her co-workers are waiting outside. The doctor is a little surprised by her profession and signs a prescription. He guarantees her that she is perfectly fine, and that her body works now. She questions him about his fee, but he refuses to take any money. After this, he suggests Camille to put on some weight for his sake. Then, Camille leaves the van and heads outside, where her colleagues Mamadou and Samia are waiting for her on a bench. They start questioning her about the way the doctor examined her, and whether he checks the weight on a weighing scale. Camille responds to all their questions and informs them that she is going shopping. After this, she heads to the bus stop. Paulette opens up the cage of her birds and feeds them. She inhales the fresh air in her garden and then feeds her hens. She goes inside her kitchen and pours milk into 2 bowls, which she then serves to her cats. Yvonne opens the house gate and calls Paulette. She does not get any answer, so she calls Paulette's name again and rushes inside. She runs towards Paulette when she finds her lying on the floor unconscious. The restaurant chef calls Frank and informs him that he has a phone call. Frank tries to avoid it, but ends up taking it because it is his grandmother's call. Frank rides fast to the hospital on his bike, to get there as fast as he can. The nurse assures him that everything is fine, and that the operation was successful. He enters the room and greets Paulette with a hug and forehead kiss. He questions her about her health and the reason for her tears, despite the fact that her operation went fine. She informs him that the doctors are sending her to a different place. He comforts her by explaining that she is just going to a physical therapy center, after which she can go back to her house and garden. Paulette sobs in tears and mentions that she is worried for her little pets. Frank assures her that he will look after them, but she disagrees, because she knows that he will not have enough time. He then gives the idea that Yvonne may take care of them. He talks to her about his new bike and she advises him to drive slowly. Camille and her team are cleaning in the office when she leaves a note for a worker to use the trash bin. Following this, she heads home and finds Philibert struggling with the entrance code. He asks for her help and she comes through, which leads to a conversation starting between them. They exchange some words, and she mentions in passing that she resides on the top floor and leaves. Philibert goes inside Frank's room, where he has fallen asleep with his shoes on. He takes off his shoes and goes to his own room. The next morning, he prepares breakfast and Frank wakes up from the ringing of his alarm. He joins Philibert on the table, who serves him some tea. He suggests Frank sleep, as it is his day off, but finds out that Frank has to meet his grandmother today. Frank goes to Paulette's garden and requests Yvonne to look after her pets. He does his best to convince her, but she refuses and leaves in an irritated mood. Now that there's no other option, he feeds her cats and dogs himself. Camille notices Philibert in the supermarket, and he gets nervous after seeing her. She begins a conversation with him and invites him over for dinner. He seems overwhelmed by her invitation and excitedly agrees to join. They walk to their building together on the way back. At the hospital, Paulette shows interest in knowing more about Frank's life. He tells her all about his home, restaurant, and girlfriend. She falls asleep during the conversation, and he gently rubs his hand on her face. Philibert walks upstairs with a bouquet and a fancy basket of crockery. He opens the basket in front of Camille and shows her his family's crest. She finds it really beautiful, and he further inquires about the way she manages to live in such a small place. She responds that she is used to it, and grabs a bottle of alcohol. She notifies Philibert that she invited him because he is a kind person who talks to her, unlike everyone else in this building. He empathizes with her and they take a shot of alcohol, after which he goes to use the washroom. Then they have dinner while talking about his historical knowledge and experiences. She becomes curious and questions if he teaches history, but discovers that he works in a museum instead. He also wants to know about her job, so she shares that she works in an office. He brings up his roommate Frank while she is washing dishes. They talk about Frank for a while, after which he leaves her apartment with contentment. At the door, he honestly confesses to her that he sells postcards outside the museum, and she also admits that she is a cleaning lady. Frank is in his bedroom with a girl, but gets interrupted because of a crashing sound. It seems like it's Philibert, who is shouting, so he leaves his room and inquires about the problem. It turns out that Philibert mistakenly dropped his basket, and all his crockery is broken now. Frank is curious about his roommate's fancy outfit and gets to know about Camille, whom he now wants to meet soon. Camille goes to a restaurant to meet her mother. She interrogates her mother to find out about her well-being, but receives a taunting reply instead. Her mother is disappointed with her work as a cleaning lady. Offended, she forbids her mother to talk this way, but her mother continues to make her feel bad. Camille cries and washes her face in the washroom before returning to her table. She continuously drinks alcohol, which annoys her mother even more. She resembles Camille with her father and criticizes her skinny appearance. Camille heads to a salon and gets a boy cut. She sketches herself while getting the cut, and stares in the mirror for a while. Frank is on a phone call with Mrs. Carminat. He requests her to find a new place for him with suitable rent. He elaborates that he wants a house with a garden for his grandmother, but she makes it very clear that such a house is not affordable for him. Philibert chats with Frank, inquiring about his plans for the weekend. Frank is in a bad mood and replies that he will spend his day off with his grandmother. Camille puts on a muffler, wraps it around her face and coughs. Philibert spots her at the entrance and checks in on her health. He notices her new haircut and realizes that she is cold, so he gives her his hat and suggests she take care of herself. Later, Camille leaves for work. She keeps on cleaning and intensely coughing, as she is not in a healthy condition. Philibert is lying in his bed and thinks that he should check in on Camille. He heads to her house and knocks on her door, but she doesn't open. He enters and sees that Camille is almost unconscious. He picks her up and takes her to his house, where he gives her some water and medicine. He helps remove her clothes and rubs her back with a towel. The next morning, he calls a doctor to examine her. The doctor prescribes 10 days of rest and proper diet, which makes Philibert concerned about the intensity of her illness. However, he is assured that it is just the flu. Frank is listening to loud music that wakes up Camille. She finds a note from Philibert beside her bed, after which she gets up and roams around in the house. Frank is in the hospital with Paulette. She is still concerned about her pets and introduces her new friends to Frank. Soon after, he leaves for home, stating that he will call Paulette whenever he gets the time. Philibert is back home and prepares dinner for Camille. She enters the kitchen, and he commands her to rest and wait on the dining table. He sets a beautiful dinner table for her when Frank enters the house and Camille greets him. He doesn't reply and walks away in a pissed-off mood. He goes to Philibert and pesters him with questions about Camille. Philibert conveys to him that she will stay here for a few days, and that he must be kind to her. Frank does not look really happy with this new development, and questions Philibert if he loves her, but he does not give a clear indication. At the dinner table, Philibert excuses Frank's behavior, and reasons with Camille that Frank usually has awful Monday nights because he visits his grandmother. Camille starts to talk about last night, and asks him if he undressed her in front of Frank. He assures her that no such thing happened. She expresses that no one has taken care of her this way without asking for any favor in return. This realization brings a smile to her face as she continues to eat dinner. Philibert, Frank, Camille, and Paulette all stay engaged in their activities. One morning, Philibert and Camille are having breakfast when Frank starts screaming about the messy refrigerator. Camille and Philibert ignore his behavior, understanding that he is in a frustrated mood. Frank plays loud music at night, which often disturbs Camille, and she cannot sleep. Camille visits her mother in a restaurant, where she gets an offer to go on vacation together. But she turns this down because she is busy. Her mother taunts her again on her cleaning work, which leads to Camille retaliating sarcastically before she pays the bill. Meanwhile, Frank subtly warns Philibert that he does not know much about girls and should not trust anyone blindly. Philibert accompanies Camille to her room. She gets busy sketching, and he reads a book, until he notices that she is distracted and not listening attentively. He grabs her attention by sharing that he faces problems while sleeping. He further informs her that he is going to acting classes with Sandrine, which can help him get better. Camille reaches her office, where she joins Mamadou and her other co-workers. She questions Mamadou about her life, and she starts complaining about all the worst things happening to her. They talk about it for a while, and enter the elevator to begin working. Philibert goes to a theater and shares his sentiments with the audience. He states that he struggles with social anxiety, and starts stuttering whenever he tries to communicate. The audience laughs at him, and Sandrine's father orders them to stay quiet and listen. Sandrine's father recommends a speech therapist who gives music therapies to Philibert. He assures Philibert that he will get better in a few sessions with the therapist, which is enough to convince him. Frank is lying drunk on a sofa, while the music blares and his girlfriend does a seductive dance. Camille walks in on them and rushes to her room, irritated. The music annoys her so much that she comes outside and requests Frank to turn it down. He refuses, and his girlfriend makes fun of Camille. This frustrates Camille so much that she throws his speakers out of the window. Frank gets aggressive towards her and she runs to her room, quickly closing the door in his face. He bangs the door and keeps on cursing her. The next morning, he visits his grandmother in the hospital. Paulette is upset with him because of his bad temper and wrong actions. She scolds him, and he gets agitated in return. He begins to list all the struggles he is facing in an annoyed tone, which causes Paulette to get emotional and start crying. He calms himself and requests her to stop crying and take a rest. She goes back to her bed, and he joins her to watch television together. Camille packs all her stuff and goes to an electronics shop. She buys a new set of speakers for Frank, which he acknowledges in his room when he returns home. He reads her secret notebook in the kitchen, and later sits her down to have a chat with her. She questions him about the keys to the backstairs, and he accepts that he has them. He refuses to hand them to her because he doesn't want her to leave. This is because her absence will make Philibert lonely and upset again, which is something he doesn't want. She lights a cigarette, and he thanks her for the new speakers before apologizing for his behavior last night. She calls him out on his constant weird behavior, but he somehow manages to convince her to stay. Philibert meets the therapist and performs all the speech exercises with him, while the therapist encourages him to speak more. He leaves to see his family for the holidays, and Camille goes to the station to see him off. He advises her to take care of herself, after which she gives him a goodbye hug. Camille enjoys the employer's party with her co-workers, where they joyfully sing and celebrate on Christmas night. Meanwhile, Philibert visits the church ceremony and joins a dinner with his family. After the party, Camille sits alone in her bedroom smoking a cigarette. Frank knocks on her door and enters, holding a red scarf. He gifts it to her, mentioning that his grandmother knitted it. She likes it and gives him a warm hug. He sits on her bed and takes a sip of her drink, while noticing the sketches lying on her bed. Camille gets the idea of making one as a gift to Paulette. She urges Frank to take off his shirt and starts drawing him. They're interrupted by a call that Frank gets from his chef, after which he asks about her plans for New Year's Eve. He proposes the idea of her working as an extra in the kitchen, and she agrees to it. Camille works hard with the other chefs at the very busy restaurant. As the clock strikes midnight on New Year's Eve, they open a bottle of champagne and greet each other. Camille's phone rings and she attends the call from Philibert, who also wishes her a happy new year. Frank joins them on the call and assures him that he is being nice to Camille, as she's his friend now. Camille and Frank go to receive Philibert, who teases them about how insufferable they used to find each other. Camille insinuates that they should go to a restaurant, and even offers to pay for it. Frank also has some days off, so it works out for all of them. At the dinner table, Philibert shares stories from his vacation, and all the things he experienced with his family. He hilariously mimics his mother's actions, and Camille appreciates his skills. Frank interrupts, expressing his dislike for the food, but Philibert and Camille disagree with him. They all raise a toast to Philibert's success. Camille packs her sketchbooks as she leaves with Frank to experience pig hunting. They ride on his bike and reach Sebastian's house, where he welcomes them, and they have dinner with his wife G9 and their kids. Later, G9 takes the kids to bed and settles down Camille and Frank in another room. Camille is bothered by the fact that there is only one bed in the room, but Frank doesn't mind, as he informed them that he was coming over with his girlfriend. Camille doesn't approve of it and goes to brush her teeth. They manage to lie on the same bed with a blanket on. Frank begins to confide in her about his childhood and past. He vents that he has never seen his father, and his mother left him with his grandparents at an early age. He knows that he'll get emotional, but continues nevertheless as he recalls that his mother came back to take him when he was 10, but he resisted going with her. He still remembers the way she hugged him with her big bust, and how disgusted he felt then. Now that he's grown up, he meets her once a year. She has married a drunk, with whom she has a son who wants to be a chef, and Frank will help him. Camille admits to feeling cold, and he emphasizes that this isn't normal, and that she should put on some weight. They talk about it for a while and then switch off the lights. Before sleeping, Camille compliments him for being a nice guy, even though he can be abrupt at times. The next morning, Camille wakes up terrified because she hears some horrible sounds. She learns from Frank that pigs are behind this commotion. They freshen up and go outside, where the chefs are marinating the pigs for cooking. They set a big table and enjoy their lunch, while Camille peacefully sketches the chef while he is eating. Philibert visits his therapist and performs some speech exercises with him. He is congratulated for reducing his stuttering and getting better. Camille accompanies Frank on his next visit to Paulette. It seems like Paulette already knows her, because of how much she has heard about her from Frank. She seems happy as Camille is a positive influence on Frank, which makes them better as a couple. Frank corrects his grandmother by clarifying that they do not share a room. While he leaves the women alone and roams in the garden for a while, Paulette expresses her grief to Camille. She shares that she has a house and pets to live with, and that she no longer wants to stay in the hospital anymore. She wipes her tears and changes the topic of discussion. Camille attempts to convince Philibert to bring Paulette to his house, but he isn't ready to take such a big step, because he is apprehensive of the consequences. He switches to a new topic and questions Camille about her birthday. She reports that no one really cares about her birthday, but he argues that he would have given her a nice present. Frank joins them at the breakfast table, and they start planning for Camille's birthday. Philibert comes up with the idea of celebrating Camille's birthday at an outdoor location, but Frank refuses to come, as he will be busy with Paulette. Camille suggests inviting Paulette for lunch with them, and insists that it will be her present. At the restaurant, Camille, Philibert, and Frank are accompanied by Paulette and her friends. Karine brings the cake to the table and Camille blows out the candles. They all sing the birthday melody for her. Eventually, Paulette sees them off and sits in the car to return to the hospital, constantly waving to bid them goodbye. On the way back home, Camille and Philibert communicate in silence while Frank keeps driving. She questions Frank about the cost he pays for the nursing home, and proposes paying it to her instead, to take care of Paulette. Philibert also gives his approval on this, so Frank cheerfully turns around to bring Paulette along with them. They give Paulette a tour of the house and ensure that all her needs are met. Paulette hands them a list of things that should be arranged for her satisfaction. With time, Paulette grows very attached to Camille because of how much time they spend together. Camille takes her for walks, showers her, and makes her sketches. On the other hand, Philibert invests his time in doing the speech exercises to get better. They all have dinner together, and Camille shows them Paulette's sketch. Frank comments on how nice it is, and decides to keep it for himself, while everyone commends his cooking skills. One day, Camille comes out of her room, overhearing Philibert's rehearsal for his play. She enters Frank's room and undresses herself, despite his warning that this isn't the right time. He eventually gives in and lets her in his bed, where she confides in him about her past and her father. She speaks for a while until she makes eye contact with him, after which they begin to kiss each other passionately. Frank is asleep when Camille cuddles up to him to wake him up. She kisses his face and teases him seductively. He grabs her from behind and slides her into his bed to resume making out. Later, he cooks a meal for her and serves it with some wine. They raise a toast to the possibility of not ever falling in love, but only getting along in bed and having drinks together. Afterward, Frank rides on his bike with a sorrowful expression, while Camille searches for him in his bedroom. He lights a cigarette at the seaport with tears in his eyes and walks alone. He finally returns home and finds Camille standing by his bedroom. He indicates that he wants to sleep, and she goes away. The next day, Camille notices Frank going for a shower and stops him, wanting to get with him again because of how good it feels. He shares the sentiment, except for the fact that he craves commitment from her. They're at the theater when Sandrine announces Philibert's performance, which goes really well, especially with Camille, Frank, and Paulette cheering him on from the audience. Frank and Camille take Paulette back to her house. They enter through the garden, which causes Paulette to get really excited about meeting her dogs. Once she's done hugging them, Frank and Camille settle her in her room, where she comfortably sits in her armchair. Frank leaves for work while Camille stays back with her. Before leaving, he briefs Camille about the home appliances. She brings up the goodbye kisses he used to give her. He rudely replies that he will have sex with her on Monday, but there are no more goodbye kisses. Nevertheless, she takes good care of Paulette. One morning, Camille brings her breakfast to her and finds her sitting still. Upon closer inspection, she finds out that Paulette has passed away. Camille sketches the scene to immortalize Paulette's presence. After Paulette's final rites, Camille goes to Philibert's house and notices that he is all packed up, because he has sold his house and is now moving with Sandrine. She congratulates him and leaves. Camille waits outside Frank's workplace before heading to a bar with him. There, he breaks the news that he is leaving for England tomorrow. She gives him several reasons to stay, except for clearly confessing that she wants him to stay for her. He pushes her to be clear and direct, or else he will leave. Camille runs to the station in time and tries to stop him through her proclamation of love. To her dismay, he rejects it, so she walks away crying, until she receives a call from him. He talks to her on the phone and surprises her by sneaking up on her, talking directly into her ear. She grabs him into an embrace and then a deep kiss to commemorate their union. In the end, Frank ends up opening his own restaurant, and they cherish a beautiful life together.